Welcome to Passages Pulse, where we track the heartbeat of Israel and the Middle East from a Christian perspective. In a time of confusion, division, and misinformation, we're here to help you cut through the noise with truth, clarity, and conviction. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Passages Pulse. My name is Sebastian. At the time of this recording, it's Wednesday, July 16, 2025, and it is 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm here again with my colleague and co-host Josiah. Hey Josiah, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Sebastian. How are you doing?
Doing well, enjoying the summer. Thank you for being with us again. So friends, today we're going to be talking about a subject that I'll introduce in a second, but I just want to acknowledge that as of this morning, before we started recording this podcast, there are reports coming out of Israel of about 1,000 Israeli Druze. This is a community of people. I'll spell it out because it's hard to get it sometimes. D-R-U-Z-E, the Druze, who are going into Syria apparently to go and defend their kinsmen, their ethnic group that is being attacked there. So this is a concerning development, and also it seems like Israel has been targeting certain Syrian military assets. So if you want to learn more about the situation in Syria, go to our episode after you watch this episode from 2 weeks ago, where we talked about Syria, possibility of making peace there. And we just want to let you know that we're going to be following these developments. This is breaking news right now, and we'll bring this up in future episodes. But today, our subject is going to be what's been going on lately in the American right, what can be called the MAGA movement, the Make America Great Again movement, which seems to be fracturing. Over the weekend, there were a lot of things coming out that, different factions within the conservative movement fighting back against each other. And guess who's in the middle? Guess who's in the crossfire? Well, Israel and the Jewish people. So this is a widespread issue, and Tucker Carlson has been leading the charge in many ways in this controversy. So today we're going to reflect in his recent interviews, in his statements, and dig a little deeper to try and understand what's going on. So let's get into it. There have been some interviews. Tucker Carlson, former Fox News anchor, now he's a podcaster, kind of an influencer. He's been doing interviews. There are two interviews we want to start talking about today. Let me set the stage by describing them. The first one, it was before President Trump ordered the attacks on Iran. He was one of these people sounding the alarms that if we did this, it would be World War III, it would be catastrophic for the United States. So he interviewed Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. Many of you probably have seen some of the cutaways from that interview. Tucker's critics argue that the interview was adversarial, that he was trying to gotcha. He was trying to get him. And he asked random questions like, what is the population of Iran? Where is that in the Bible? He was trying to get him. And he quizzed Cruz about certain things. Here's a picture of that interview. It seems adversarial from that picture. So here's the question that he asked. He asked, many others, do Christians really owe Israel any support? Are Christians biblically mandated to support the state of Israel? Is Israel is modern Israel the descendants of biblical Israel, or are they something completely different? So Tucker Carlson fans argue that the questions were fair, that he was doing a good job, but Cruz needed to be better prepared. So Josiah, what do you think? Was Tucker being fair? Was he trying to get him? Or it was just that Ted Cruz was not prepared for the interview?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, fascinating question. I think it's a bit of both from my perspective. I think on the one hand, Tucker Carlson clearly had an agenda. And in a moment, we'll talk about another interview he did. When you juxtapose it or compare it to the Cruz interview, it makes the Cruz interview look even more adversarial or more driven by a specific agenda, which is interesting. I think that is problematic in large part because Tucker Carlson is not just a podcaster. If you're just a person with a podcast, of course, you're allowed to think what you will, say what you will on your podcast. The issue from my perspective is that Tucker, in many cases, continues to style himself or present himself as a journalist, as someone who's really engaging in journalism, as a truther, someone who's primarily interested in doing the kind of investigative work that other people don't want to do. And from my perspective, that's a bit unethical. If you're going to bring an agenda to a conversation, like the interview with Ted Cruz, but also claim to be a journalist or a truther, so to speak, then there's a bit of a contradiction there. It's not exactly, in my opinion, upholding the standards of journalistic ethics that I would expect or hope from a journalist. I might be naive. I probably am expecting too much of many journalists. But again, you're supposed to be objective and be doing good investigative work. And that's not really what this interview played out as, it didn't seem like. Now, on the flip side of that, I think it was interesting to hear the reaction, not just from some of Tucker Carlson's fans, but also from people who might be a little bit on the left wing or Christians who don't necessarily support Ted Cruz, some even who might support Ted Cruz. Across the board, people felt like Ted Cruz didn't do a great job during the interview. And the fact that it's not just one segment of the audience, but that you have many Christians even saying, yeah, I didn't feel like Ted Cruz really represented us well or represented Christian theology well when he was asked specific questions. That I think is a little bit concerning. You have to keep in mind some of these people who are out there, some other Christian podcasts who are reacting to the Tucker podcast are not necessarily fans of Cruz, so they also have an agenda or reason to criticize him. But you would hope that someone of Senator Cruz's status might be able to make a more winsome or compelling case for why he believes what he believes. And that was one of the primary criticisms of his performance during the interview, was that he stumbled sometimes. He wasn't entirely sure of himself. He was not always able to remember biblical references when he was pressed on why he holds certain theological positions. And I think what the interview demonstrated is that it's important for you to not just know what you believe and why you believe it, but also be able to communicate that effectively, not just what you believe, but why you believe it. Where in the Bible do you get this idea? Why do you interpret that passage of the Bible that way? And for better or worse, you can agree or disagree, but I think what the reaction from many people, including many Christians, demonstrates is that it wasn't persuasive. It just wasn't a very persuasive interview, unfortunately. And regardless of whether Tucker Carlson set him up for a bad interview or not, the result was probably not what Senator Cruz wanted out of that interview.
Yeah, I think we've all been there when we quote a Bible verse. Not quote, we mention a Bible verse, but we don't remember the exact citation. So basic lesson, like we should do better to memorize scripture and know the Bible verse reference that we're talking about. It's always helpful. Also, I just want to highlight, like Senator Cruz is really smart. If you look up his Wikipedia page, people, he went to Harvard Law. He was a debater, like champion. Josiah too, right? Josiah.
Probably not the same format of debate, but yes, I did compete. And
all right, so
did reasonably well.
Shout out to all the debaters. If you were in debate, put in the comments. Let us know about your experience in debate. Josiah was big into that. So, anyways, the guy knows how to debate. He knows how to recall information, but I guess he was just caught off guard. Also, he's the son of a pastor. His father is a pastor as well, so I think he was just caught off guard in the moment. But all right, that was the first interview, the Tucker Carlson interview with Ted Cruz, which has unleashed a theological discussion all over YouTube. So you can go follow that. The second interview, it was the interview with the president of Iran. So just for information, the head of Iran really is the Ayatollah, the religious leader of the country. But then they allowed some people to have elections and eventually can become the president. So the president of Iran, he was interviewed by Tucker after Israel had attacked Iran and after the United States had bombed these nuclear facilities. Here's a picture of that interview. Of course, it was done in person. It was done remotely. So some thought that it was great journalism, that Tucker was just doing outstanding journalism interviewing this guy. Other thought that this was a softball interview, that he didn't go as hard as he went on Ted Cruz to the president of Iran. Josiah, what do you think of this second interview?
I thought it was a softball interview. It was interesting. And again, when you compare it to the Ted Cruz interview, it stands out how much more Tucker pressed Ted to explain himself, whether Ted was telling the truth or not, why Ted thinks certain things are true or not. Some of that work of challenging some of the assumptions that were brought to the table during the Ted Cruz interview just didn't happen during the interview with the president of Iran, which is quite interesting. And it's part of why I think there's a question of journalistic ethics when you take a look at these two interviews side by side. Now, one of the reasons why I think this interview was especially problematic, and if you do bit deeper dive into it, what makes this interview problematic is the fact that the president of Iran was really allowed to just kind of say what he wanted to say and not just let assumptions go unchallenged, but let actual lies or falsehoods go unchallenged. Some of the things that he was saying during the course of this interview are things like, you know, Iran has never tried to assassinate President Trump. That's not true. There are multiple documented instances in which Iran planned to or wanted to attempt an assassination on President Trump. It's a lie to say otherwise, but that wasn't really addressed during the interview. There were other comments made about things like, Iran doesn't really have any beef with America. That's just not true. I mean, on the
That's
record,
so
there's so many
crazy.
instances
Wow.
of Iran calling for America's ultimate destruction. So to say otherwise is just to make a blatant statement against truth, or just to deny basic facts that are on the record, their own statements in the past. He also lied about whether Iran was in compliance with different nuclear restrictions prior to the U.S. bombing of Iran. All these things that are, again, on the record. I mean, there's really no point in denying them unless you're trying to engage in some sort of propaganda. But Tucker allowed him to do that and to use his platform as a propaganda tool, which I think is just really very, very unfortunate. I think one of the things that also stood out to me when we get to this question of how Israel sort of winds up in the crosshairs a little bit is the president of Iran knows his audience, knows Tucker's audience, and he really leaned into the populist narrative that Carlson often promotes, which is anti-war and things of that nature. And what he tried to do was appeal to that side of Tucker and his audience by saying, our war is not with America, it's with Israel. The only reason why we had this brief conflict with America is because Israel dragged the United States into this war. And Israel's always doing that, dragging America into wars it doesn't want to be in, which again is just not true. If you take a look at the history, the track record of Iran's nuclear program, of its threats against the United States, its attempts to assassinate the president of the United States, I mean, clearly their war is with America, not just with Israel, and Israel didn't drag us into this. But it's, again, appealing to that populist narrative or that increasingly isolationist narrative that Tucker Carlson and his supporters are leaning into. And I think it's problematic. It's really allowing this anti-Semitic trope about Israel to fester because it is one way to speak to or to scratch the itch rather of this far right crowd that is increasingly skeptical of Israel. And it's an issue. The fact that Tucker did not address this or call it out for what it is, I think was a big issue from my perspective.
Yeah, I think this is a part of a greater trend, I think, of this modern attempt for relativism, or to make everything well, there are both sides to everything. We went to war to get Osama bin Laden, but we got to understand where he was coming from. Let's hear him out. These are the people that would have been in World War II. Well, we need to understand where the Nazis are coming from. Let's interview Hitler on national TV and see what he has to say. Like, giving a platform to these people with really bad ideologies behind him. Let's not forget that Iranian leadership, every time they meet together for their party meetings, they chant "Dead to Israel, dead to America." Sometimes dead to the UK as well. So it's so crazy. This guy is saying we don't have a problem with America, just to give people some of the facts, the evidence, and the resources. Because I'm not a journalist, but I can provide you with better facts than Tucker Carlson. The evidence that we have of Iranian plots to assassinate President Trump are from three sources. One, the Department of Justice has arrested and found somebody whose name, I have the name right here. His name is Farhad Shakiri, for plotting to assassinate President Trump. That was last summer. The second one, this was reported by the Associated Press, so you can find this article. The second one is from Time Magazine. Around the same time, there was another plot discovered by the Secret Service, and the president's detail had to be increased. Remember, this is around the time, about a year ago to this week, basically, that President Trump was there was an attempted assassination on his life in Pennsylvania. And then the last one is this guy who's been arrested. His name is Asif Merchant, who both Asif and Farhad, both of these people I mentioned, they're both IRGC assets. So they're people who have been discovered to be contacting the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran. He was scouting the rallies and the FBI discovered this. So there you go, people. There's evidence here, but did Tucker Carlson ask about this? And before we move on, his whole brand is like, I love America. Everybody else doesn't. Like, I'm the one who really loves America. Let's talk about America. But he's interviewing the president of a foreign adversary who literally tried to kill the president of our country, and he's not pushing back. So I think that calls into question his agenda. So those two interviews are representative of what's going on within the conservative right, and how Tucker Carlson, if you see his interview, his speeches, he has a following. There is a right wing following that he's gathering. So, what does that say, Josiah, about conservative politics in the United States and their relationship to Israel? Because again, Israel is caught in the middle of all this.
Yeah, so I think there's something going on that is not just about Israel, but we have to understand what's happening in this moment politically in American history. You have a President Trump, that was elected with the support of many people like Tucker Carlson, especially when he first arrived on the scene in 2015, 2016. He relied a lot on the support of some of these individuals, these conservative influencers, to receive the nomination to be elected to the White House the first time, and even the second time. To a degree, he needed some of their support. But what's becoming pretty clear is on the issues of foreign policy, especially, there's this growing divide between President Trump and some of these people that I would almost say are previous supporters. I mean, it's getting pretty difficult to describe them as supporters today, given the way that they interact with him and communicate with or about him. So there's this interesting split that's happening in the conservative movement, especially over the issue of foreign policy, that isn't necessarily about Israel, but Israel is getting caught in the crossfire. Now, it just so happens that because Israel's in the news right now and there are these various conflicts that involve Israel, that it's a perfect illustration of what's happening right now. So I'll give you a few examples of observations that I think I've made over the last few months. One, it's pretty obvious that President Trump is pro-Israel. That's not necessarily true of the far right, of the increasingly isolationist crowd or the ultra populist crowd, of which President Trump does share some similarities, but is not exactly perfectly aligned. You also have a very ultra populist or isolationist crowd that is very anti-war, and they are aligned somewhat with the libertarian wing of the conservative movement as well. President Trump is on a spectrum. He's not what you would describe as a neoconservative or a hawk. He's not very pro-war. He has used military force multiple times, yes, but in very small doses typically. It's a very short conflict. It's very targeted. It's very intentional. And his priority is always to end it as quickly as possible, to enter negotiations as quickly as possible, to make as many deals as possible. So it's not really fair to paint him as someone who is a hawk on foreign policy issues or is always going to default to the use of military force. But he's somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. He's not a hawk, but he's also not as isolationist as some of his old supporters are, who would want him to be even more so. Now, when you take a look at conflicts like what's happening in Iran, you can see that something like 80% of Republicans at the end of June, when polls were done, supported the bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities. So the political base that supports President Trump, the Republican Party, 80% of those voters supported President Trump's plan to bomb the nuclear facilities in Iran, which makes that group on the far right that opposed the bombing of Iran or opposed military intervention in Iran actually a relatively small minority. They don't represent mainstream conservatism. They don't necessarily have enough clout at this point to sway President Trump on foreign policy decisions because they are a relatively small minority. But that might be the issue. I think that really is sort of the catch there. That's part of the issue, is that he has engaged in dialogue with them many times over the past. He's made many statements in an effort to reach out to this part of the conservative movement over the past in order to build a coalition to get himself elected. But I think they thought they had more influence or even control over the president and his policy than they actually do. And that seems to be part of the issue here, is that they're realizing that he is not a pure isolationist, that he is willing to use military force when he thinks it is going to help him get a better deal, that he is not someone that they can manipulate or control necessarily, that they don't actually have that much influence over the president. And some of what you're seeing right now, I think, is a bit of spite and trying to figure out someone that they can blame for the fact that they can feel their influence over the president slipping a little bit. Israel's a very natural scapegoat. Yep. If you're trying to figure out, how do I explain the fact that I don't actually have as much influence or power or control as I thought I do? Well, it's got to be Israel's fault. It's got to be the Jews' fault, because the only reason to explain President Trump turning his back on my position is if the Jews tricked him somehow, or if Israel dragged him into this war against his own will. And that's just not what happened. President Trump has made that very clear. There's no evidence to suggest that that is the case. Again, he himself has been personally targeted by Iran several times. So he has his own very good reasons for getting involved in these wars, but that's not something that, again, this far right crowd is going to be willing to acknowledge. They're going to look for someone to blame because they feel betrayed somehow. And unfortunately, in this case, that means that Israel becomes the scapegoat.
Yeah. The main argument underlying Qatar's argument, sorry, Qatar. I've been jokingly be calling Tucker Carlson, and it's like my brain now calls him that. So Tucker Carlson has been saying that if America attacks Iran, it's against America's interests and it's only to help out Israel. Why would we put American people in danger to help out Israel? So at the base of a lot of these arguments, like it's not in our interest. Why are we doing this? So he talked in the interview, going back to the interview with Ted Cruz, about Christian Zionism. He asked silly questions like, so does the Bible mean like I will bless those who bless you? Does that mean that we need to support everything that this government of Israel does? And of course, that's not true. Not even Jewish people believe this. You can ask any Jewish person that loves Israel, that is their homeland, they're Zionists. Not even Jewish people believe that because they're Jews, they have to support everything the state of Israel do. But he is asking this question about American Christian Zionists. So, Josiah, how do you think Christians should respond to these questions by Tucker about Christian Zionism? Is Christian Zionism a sham, as he suggests, that is it's just a fraud? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a loaded question. I would say, first of all, we really need to have a conversation at some point on this podcast about Christian Zionism as it relates to, criticism of Israel. Can Christian Zionists criticize Israel or not? Do they not? I mean, that's a really important layer, I think, to the conversation that there's not enough time to unpack right now. So I'll focus on what was really the main headline of the Tucker TED interview on the subject of Christian Zionism. And really, Tucker's point basically was he was picking on Ted Cruz for not being able to name the specific scripture reference that we get this phrase, bless Israel, I will bless you kind of thing. It's Genesis 12:3. And
Ted Cruz probably has a sticky note with that in his pocket going forward.
Probably, I'm sure he would like a mulligan and would love a second take at that interview for sure, or at least that part of the interview. But that is, I think, really kind of what it came down to was Tucker saying, I just don't believe that verse necessarily can be interpreted in such a way that Christians are obligated to support the modern state of Israel. I don't think that it's explicitly about the modern state of Israel. And there was this argument about whether it does or does not explicitly mean modern Israel when it says that, those who bless Israel will be blessed in return. And for many Christian Zionists, that's an intriguing dilemma or challenge, because that is the basis for a lot of Christian Zionism or Christian Zionist theology, that we support the Jewish people because the Bible commands us to. And if that verse doesn't mean modern Israel, then it does raise questions about, okay, well, what do we do then? Are we just supporting something that we are not obligated to? And that, I think, is something that Christians do need to think about. I would say my reaction to that question and to Tucker's line of argumentation is that it's pretty narrow. It's actually very narrow. It's not really considering the Bible in context, and that it's a bit of a straw man argument, frankly. I think there's more to Christian Zionism than just that one verse. And I think if you read the Bible in context and really think about the depth of Christian Zionist theology, then there's more to it than that. It's fair to say, I think, that Genesis 12, it can be interpreted multiple ways, and it's possible to have a healthy, good faith debate on that subject. I don't think the debate that Tucker was having was a good faith conversation, but it is possible to have a good faith conversation, which maybe disagree on interpretation of Genesis 12. What I would also say is that if you read the rest of the Bible, then it's pretty clear that God does have an ongoing love and concern for the Jewish people. If you read into the New Testament, chapters like Romans 9 through 11 make it pretty obvious, pretty straightforward, that Christians, despite the fact that there is some sort of difference in relationship as part of the new covenant or the world post-Jesus and his ministry still have some sort of relationship with the Jewish people. It's mysterious in many ways, but we are still called to honor and respect and love the Jewish people. And that's important, I think, for Christians to wrestle with that reality that Paul is laying out in Romans 9 through 11. And what I would argue is that even if Genesis 12 is not explicitly about the modern state of Israel, that doesn't change the fact that we still have an obligation to love and honor and support the Jewish people. And by extension, if we have that kind of obligation, then yes, of course, we have an obligation to the modern state of Israel, because the modern state of Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. It is the only Jewish state in the world in which they can govern themselves and defend themselves. It is the home of the largest concentration of Jewish people in the world today. So as a Christian who cares about the Jewish people, yes, of course, I care about modern Israel and its safety and want it to thrive and be safe and flourish. Again, that doesn't mean, to your point, Sebastian, that I support everything that Israel does or that most Christian Zionists support everything that Israel does. But it does mean that I think Tucker's argument about whether Christian Zionism is essentially a sham was pretty shallow, and it wasn't really a fair critique of the scriptural basis or reasons why Christian Zionists, for a variety of reasons, many diverse groups within Christian Zionism have different reasons why they believe they support Israel. And Tucker just wasn't really willing to engage that.
Yeah, I want to give people just one Bible verse for you to keep in mind about this issue is Genesis 21:12. It clarifies that through Isaac and not Ishmael, the inheritance of Abraham will be tracked. So because what it says is you should bless, God is talking to Abraham, I'll bless those who bless you. So a lot of people say, well, that doesn't mean the Jews. It just means the descendants of Abraham. And Abraham had Ishmael and Isaac. But let us be aware that Isaac was the child of the promise. And again, Genesis 21:12 says that it's through Isaac. So what happens after Isaac? The Lord reaffirms his promises, reaffirms the promise of the land, which is a grant. I will give you this land. And then it goes to Jacob, and Jacob's children their descendants are able to finally take possession of the land. So the theological argument is that it is through Isaac that the Lord will fulfill this promise, this land grant. And today, the descendants of Jacob are the Israeli people, the Jewish people who have gone back to their homeland, reestablished their state after 2,000 years is a miracle. And I think because of that Bible verse, this is just me, Sebastian. I think that does imply that we should bless the descendants of Jacob, our older brothers, the roots of our faith, and that we should at the very least protect them, do what we can to protect them, to help them. And I think this is what our country, the United States, just did. They destroyed the machine that was being built to exterminate the Jewish people once again. And I think that is blessing Israel. I think that is blessing Abraham. And I think the Lord will bless our nation because of this. So thank God for this. Our country just, at the very least, destroyed the machinery that was being built to destroy the Jewish people and pushed it back by a few years at least. So I'm grateful for that. And I think that's part of blessing Israel. So, well, Josiah, that's one part of the controversy with Tucker Carlson, things he's been saying, the interview with the president of Iran, the interview with Ted Cruz. Friends, we're about to talk about the Epstein files now. That's the whole other controversy about Jeffrey Epstein. But before we do that, I want to provide people with one thought. This is my own thought here. I'm really frustrated with this character of Tucker Carlson because he is trying to show I care so much about Christians and Israel doesn't care about Christians. And if you're a Christian, you should care about this. He's trying to present himself as a righteous lover and defender of Christians. And in an interview that he did over the weekend, he talked about how he has this story like, at Fox News, I wasn't allowed to they're not pro-Christians because I wanted to interview this guy from Bethlehem about how Christians are treated in Bethlehem. Nope, I couldn't do that. So he's trying to talk about the Bethlehem, which is a city in a Palestinian territory. It's not in Israel proper. He claims that Christians are persecuted, all this, that. I just want to say, all passages, friends watching this, drop in the comments if you've been to Bethlehem. Because I think, Josiah, like 90% of us who have been to Israel with passages, we go to Bethlehem, right? Like a very, very high number of our buses.
It's a lot harder since October 7.
Right.
So I would clarify that anyone who's been to Israel with passages since October 7, you probably have been able to go just because of the war and its impact on the West Bank. But yeah, prior to October 7, it was a part of our program because it is important to engage with that part of history, Christian heritage, and what's happening there in the West Bank.
Yeah, and it's not part of Israel proper. Israelis are not allowed, so our tour guide needs to get off the bus, and we need to use a new guide, usually a Christian from Bethlehem. So my whole point here is that he's trying to highlight how, Christians are mistreated, and I was not allowed to ask this question because Fox News wouldn't let me ask it. But here's what I want to say: Qatar, sorry, again, Tucker Carlson this year interviewed Putin, the head of Russia. He interviewed the president of Iran, and he interviewed the prime minister of Qatar and the foreign ministry of Qatar. Three heads of state from these three countries that persecute Christians. Did he ask him about how Christians are treated in Qatar? Did he ask him how Christians are tortured and executed in Iran? Did he ask how it is illegal to share the gospel in Russia? In Russia, there is a law that was passed in 2016 where it's illegal to share the gospel, and Protestants are considered foreign agents. So the only religion that's allowed is Russian Orthodoxy. If you're a Baptist, if you're a Presbyterian, any other Protestant denomination, they're banned in Russia and they're considered a foreign agent. So another thing that an investigative reporter named Laura Loomer found that Qatar had paid $200,000 to a PR firm named Luminate Advisors to secure this interview with Tucker Carlson. Now, Tucker Carlson denies I didn't get a single penny. Of course, he has plausible deniability. Qatar, this is part of a law that's called the Foreign Agents Registration Act. She has the receipt, she has the screenshot that Qatar hired a lobbying firm to hire Tucker Carlson to do the interview. So Qatar did not pay Tucker Carlson for the interview. Qatar paid a lobbying firm that then worked to secure the interview. So of course, there is no paycheck made from Qatar to Tucker, but there is a lobbying firm in the middle arranging the interview. And again, I'm naming facts. The reporter is Laura Loomer, the lobbying firm is Lumen 8 Advisors, and there is the screenshots from the Foreign Agent Registration Act of this transaction. So Tucker Carlson had the opportunity to interview the head of Qatar and ask him. In Qatar, Christians cannot gather legally. Bibles are banned. There is very limited. Muslims, if you convert to Christianity, if you're a foreign agent, you can be deported. In Iran, of course, the church is persecuted. So my whole point here is these three countries, according to opendoors.org, which is an organization that tracks Christian persecution, are terrible offenders and persecutors of Christians. But Tucker Carlson, the defender of Christians, did not ask the presidents of these countries the questions that he should have asked. So that's my rant. Just wanted to highlight that this guy is inconsistent, and I think he has an agenda. And I think Christians should be careful when we listen to him, because he is definitely has an anti-Israel agenda, and he's not sincere about his concern for Christians. Okay. Let's now go to the Jeffrey Epstein thing. Over the weekend, things got weird when the Epstein files have re-entered the picture. So, Josiah, can you open up this can of worms? What's going on with Jeffrey Epstein and Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, well, things got weird, I think is a good way of putting it. So if you're not familiar, just rewind real quick, crash course on Jeffrey Epstein, and then fast forward to what has been happening recently. Jeffrey Epstein's a really bad guy. No one denies that.
Yep.
He was convicted of some sex trafficking charges, very, very limited in scope compared to what he actually is believed to have done. He was later accused of and arrested again for a variety of sex trafficking charges, including sex trafficking of minors. And he died before he was able to actually go on trial, died in prison. Of course, there are various conspiracy theories about did he kill himself, as was the official story. Was he killed by someone else? And, conspiracy theories abound about what actually happened there. But the Epstein files refers to basically a collection of documents that would have been gathered during the investigation that might have contained the names of various clients. And supposedly the theory, I think it's really more of a conspiracy theory, but the theory that many people have rallied behind is that those client names includes names of very rich and powerful people, politicians, celebrities, and a long list of people that don't want that information to get out. Now, part of what has been a part of President Trump's story and the story of some of his supporters, like Tucker Carlson, is there's been this commitment to, or this conversation about declassifying the Epstein files once Trump was able to get back into office, install his people at the FBI and the Department of Justice, new Attorney General. He was going to release that information to the public. his attorney general basically reviewed the files and made the determination that the smoking gun just wasn't there. The kind of information that people wanted, the really juicy gossip, just didn't exist in the files, essentially. She didn't think it was worth declassifying them. So she chose not to. And then she was attacked by people both inside the administration, the FBI, as well as a lot of people like Tucker Carlson or those far right influencers who argued that she was part of the conspiracy because she was refusing to declassify the files. And then President Trump actually got on social media and basically said, cut it out. You really have to stop attacking my attorney general because she's working really hard to do her job. You're really making it hard for her to do her job. And there's really important things that I want her focused on that are not this. I don't need her wasting time defending herself against these people on the far right who are engaging in these conspiracy theories when there's things that really need to get done. So for President Trump to make a statement like that is in and of itself pretty significant. And again, the observation that I think is one of the through lines of this episode is that there is something really interesting happening right now where this alliance between President Trump and some of these influencers on the far right it seems like it's kind of falling apart a little bit. I don't want to say it's totally collapsed, but if he's out here publicly fighting on social media with these people saying, leave my attorney general alone and, move on from this issue that was one of the issues that he campaigned on, this alliance is weakening pretty quickly, it seems like. And again, the influence and the control that this crowd of influencers has over President Trump and his agenda seems to be slipping. Again, when that happens, you tend to see some sort of reaction, grasping at straws, figuring out how do we find someone to blame? How do we find a way to control the narrative and take control back? And what's happened most recently is Tucker, among other people, he's not the only one, basically came out over the weekend with these claims that, okay, we figured it out. The reason why these files exist and why Epstein did all these things and why no one, including President Trump, is willing to tell the truth about who he was is because he was a Mossad agent. He was working for Israeli intelligence. They were running this massive blackmail operation. They probably blackmailed President Trump. And that's what's going on here. I mean, it's the Israelis. They're the ones to blame for all of this, for all of the poor, girls who were trafficked, underage girls who were trafficked. It's the Israelis' fault. Wild accusations to be making. And there's really no basis for this. I don't think there's any evidence that's been brought forward to back this up other than some pretty wild speculation. And really, it's what it is. It's speculation. And I would say sensationalism is what it comes down to. But what it demonstrates is that the reaction when people feel like they're losing something, whether that's influence, power, ability to control the agenda or the narrative or whatever, is to try to take it back. And unfortunately, what that often means is that rather than engaging in some form of critical thinking or introspection, they rely on anti-Semitic tropes. They sort of default to these anti-Semitic tropes. And that seems to be what's happening right now, unfortunately, as they go down this path that's starting to look more and more bizarre and nonsensical, is they're just kind of losing control of the narrative and going to some extremes in order to try to get it back.
Yeah, I think I can understand the secular desire behind wanting to know more about this investigation. Let us remember that a big part of Trump's base is this impetus for anti-elitism. Like, there are these elites drain the swamp. There are these people who have been doing us wrong and they're elitists and we need to bring them down. So there's still there. And I think from a secular point of view, I can see why people really want this to come out and finally their world will make sense. We'll find the videos and all this stuff. But I just want to talk to Christians. There are people out there who really want to use your faith and appeal to your religion to try to get you to care about their political agenda. In a few weeks, we're going to release an episode about Crisis King, talking to a pastor about this and how a lot of people are politicizing this for their own agenda, not even Christians. So that's my thing. The Jeffrey Epstein, one of his companions or his main associate is this woman named Ghislaine
Maxwell.
Ghislaine Maxwell, sorry, that's her name. She is, in her trial, the Department of Justice released these flight logs that were in Jeffrey's private jet taking people there. And in those private logs, there are a lot, everybody who's famous basically has been to this island. Bill Clinton, President Trump, a lot of people, the Prince of England, Prince Andrew, who's the brother of the current King of England. So let me just say this about that. We're trying to highlight how in this whole controversy, Israel is the bad guy. They're always trying to get Israel is Mossad, this anti-Semitic instinct to blame the Jews for everything. Why isn't Tucker Carlson making videos about England? What about M16, whatever their Secret Service is called? We literally have a picture of the Prince of England and Prince Andrew hugging at a party with an underage girl who is now a woman, and she has come up publicly accused Prince Andrew of raping her. And so, again, you can go so many different ways. There are a lot of people from different nationalities involved in this, but they're going after Israel because there's always this anti Semitic instinct. So I think as Christians, we should just think critically. What we've been trying to do today, and I've really been trying to provide some facts, naming some sources so you can check this for yourself. But I also want to add that the Prime Minister of Israel, the former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, has come out and publicly said, as Prime Minister of Israel, the Mossad reported directly to me. And I can confirm that Jeffrey Epstein has never been an agent of the Mossad. And that's a pretty big statement. Like, he's putting his reputation out there on the line. So I think Christians, I hope we stop giving more fuel to this fire, and we should reflect on what is it that every time there's a controversy, there are people very interested in blaming the Jews for it. Josiah, anything you want to conclude on how Christians should respond to this?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. If you look back at what we've talked about today, we've picked on Tucker Carlson a little bit because of some of his inconsistencies and whatnot. But I do want to close by saying that we need to take more, I think, initiative and responsibility for how we engage with the news, whether that is mainstream media, whether that's alternative media like Tucker or any number of influencers in that space. We each individually need to take responsibility for the kind of news that we consume and the way that we consume it. So there's a few things I definitely would recommend to Christians. One, it's really important to know your Bible. Part of Christianity, this faith that we share as Christians, the foundation of it is the Bible. It's where we get the basic truths that we share and we believe in. It's where we get the basis for our theological framework. It's where we understand the truth about who God is and who we are, and the truth about our relationship to him and to each other. It all comes from the Bible. Without that, there's nothing. So if you want to be a faithful Christian in the midst of all of this confusion and chaos about what's true and what's not surrounding us right now, you really need to know your Bible, know it well, and know why you believe what you believe. Don't just, rehearse a few talking points and sound bites, but really know, like, why do you believe what you believe? Where in the Bible do you get that from? And are you reading the Bible correctly? I think you need to be confident in that in order to be confident in your faith and in your grasp of what is true and what is not in the world today. The second thing that I would say is that in general, Christians, yes, but people in general, we really need to just be thinking more critically about what we're reading or what we're listening to. Not everything that you read or hear is going to be true. Frankly, everyone has some kind of agenda. Every news source that you're going to read has some kind of agenda. And any source of information that tells you, you can trust me because I'm the truther, I'm the only one willing to tell you the truth or to dig for the truth, even them you should be skeptical of, because even those people have an agenda. Perhaps even just as much of an agenda, if not more so, than other sources of information. So I think we really need to be willing to, equally apply an equal standard of skepticism and critical thinking to every source of information that you get, not trusting any one source of information who shares your perspective or is telling the story the way that you want it told. Don't blindly trust those people, because you need to be able to think for yourself and think critically. The last thing that I would say is it's really important as Christians that we are able to pause, take a moment, and pray. Pray that we would be given discernment, pray that the work of the Holy Spirit would be active in our lives, helping us to know the truth, to seek after the truth, to long for the truth. Because without that, it's really confusing out there. There's a lot of competing ideas and narratives and people trying to get your attention and tell you a different story. And I think we need the work of the Holy Spirit to help us discern what is true and what is not. We should be very earnestly praying for that in our lives. That's what I would say.
Yeah, you make me. I like to conclude with this thought. I think there could be a temptation for many Christians in America, or tendency to see that your faith, to be a Christian in America, is to support this political party. But what if that political party start going down a path that starts adopting ideologies that are anti-biblical, that go against what I think the Bible teaches, or the heart of Jesus, like what the heart of God for certain things, including the Jewish people, including the people of Israel as represented in their state, or the state of Israel. So I think we're going to have to be watching for this trend. I think a lot of people, like, let's just say, like, a lot of people will say, like, if you're a Christian, because of the platform of the other of the Democratic Party, you're only left with one option here, and it's vote for the Republican Party. But the Republican Party is already softening their stance in some of, like, biblical standards for family, for instance. So what's going to happen? Like, a lot of people, I think, are going to have a tension between their biblical identity, their Christian identity, and their representation of those ideas in the political world. And we just need to pray and be active. We can still be active, and we can make our biblical Christian beliefs be represented in policy, in law. But at the end of the day, we need to be faithful to the Bible and not to a political party. So, and I want to say this: I'm the guy, Passages, who is responsible for our alumni, and I'm great. I don't see this in our alumni. I can honestly say this: meet with a lot of our alumni, and I think alumni are just really church-centered people who really love the church, their Bible, and they're not as political as other groups. So, anyways, that was just my thinking. That we will continue watching this trend and see what happens. Let's pray that President Trump has been distancing himself, right, from some of these radical minorities, says with theories. So I hope that we all will continue to think biblically about this. So, Josiah, kind of a difficult episode today. I think we tried to give our audience some food for thought here. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions about any of the stuff, any comments, drop it in the comments. Like I said, we have a lot of more videos coming up about special episodes about anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and Christ is King, that kind of thing. Thank you to our producers, Avery and Lindsay, for helping us make this video. Josiah, any last word before we go?
I think I've talked enough. I'm good. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for being here with us, brother. We'll see you guys next week. Bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Passages Pulse. Help us grow this community by liking, sharing, and subscribing. If you like this week's episode, let us know by leaving a comment below. This podcast is a project of Passages Israel. We exist to educate the next generation of Christians on modern Israel, deepen the roots of their faith, and equip leaders to foster positive Christian engagement with Israel and the Jewish people. To learn more about Passages, follow us on social media or visit us at passagesisrael.org. Until next time, we'll keep our finger on the pulse.